Welcome to the podcast, everyone. I am Jon Wilner, WilnerHotline.com, and he is John Canzano at JohnCanzano.com. And we have got, is it 3 shows in one or 4 shows in one here? There's so much to get to. We could talk about just about the games in week 5 because there's some fascinating games. We could talk about expansion and realignment. We could talk about lawsuits. They're each worthy of their own episodes, and yet we're going 3 in 1 here. Where do you want to start?
I think the challenge is to try to weave them together. And, this is like a potluck episode, but it's rich. And the fact of the matter is we have a lot to get to. I think there's a lot of people who care about realignment in the Pac-12, want to know what's going on with Gonzaga, want to know what's happening with that lawsuit. What should the Mountain West Conference do? And then we'll talk about the week 5 games in the end. So why don't we just get going, Wilner, with the first topic. Let's talk Pac-12 realignment. Conference now sitting at 7 members as of the time that we are recording this. Utah State, the last in, UNLV on the fence. A lot of speculation about what might happen there. But let's go back to what occurred and what went down on Monday and into Tuesday. What did you sort of make of the activities Monday into Tuesday?
The first thing is that what played out very publicly was what a lot of people expected. And typically with realignment, it's a surprise, right? When the Pac-12 expanded, was that 2 weeks ago now, and added the 4 Mountain West schools, it kind of caught everybody off guard until the last minute. It was all done in the background. This we knew was coming. We weren't sure of the exact timing, but we knew it was coming. We knew they were going to make a play for those schools in the American Conference. We knew if that didn't work, they were going to kind of U-turn and focus on the Mountain West. And that's exactly how it all played out. In realignment, you usually don't get the public plot, to that extent. It's usually behind the scenes.
Yeah, I wondered how intentional that was by the Pac-12 because, look, I was told on early Monday morning that they had a cascading order of offers ready. So they knew Plan A, Memphis, Tulane, and South Florida. It was the 3 schools that they were going to make offers to. And then, they would pivot out of that and it would be offers to UNLV and Utah State. But not getting those schools from the American looked like a swing and a miss. And there was no way around it. And I kind of wondered about the optics of that from the Pac-12's perspective. And you're right that the prior announcement of those other 4 schools was done like stealth-like. It was, it was a ninja move. And, everybody got surprised by it, even though people were talking about it and speculating. Nobody saw it coming on that Wednesday night and that Thursday morning. So it was very different and just kind of a furious and frantic scramble. And then, when schools were recommitting and going, it was just a lot of stress. It reminded me, frankly, of 2 summers ago on that Thursday morning, and the Pac-12 conference was, Oregon and Washington were supposed to show up to the meeting and didn't show up to the meeting. And I think there were a lot of people that were looking at it going, oh, here you go again. Is the Pac-12 bumbling and fumbling around? Ultimately, though, you tell me, were you surprised that the 4 American schools passed?
I wasn't. I would have been surprised if they had taken the offer. And the reason for that is the lack of certainty. It was a chicken and egg thing. Can you get a firm offer on your media rights valuation without knowing who's in your conference? But how do you get the schools into your conference if they don't know what your media rights valuation is? And I think that those schools just didn't think there was enough certainty with the money, which is understandable. University presidents, very conservative, as we've talked about. Even if the Pac-12 could have made a strong case that we are the better spot for you long haul, it's sometimes hard for presidents to see beyond the next couple of years, and especially when you're not getting guaranteed money. It was a lot of based on projections, so that's always risky.
Well, realignment for me, I mean, all the moves that we have seen, whether it's USC, UCLA, Oregon, Washington, I mean, you can make an argument about tradition, you can make an argument about geography, but financially, these were no-brainer moves that were presented to these schools. When you say, hey, it's either 30 or 40 million or 70 million in the Big Ten Conference, that is not a difficult decision for an academic to wrap their heads around. In that
Right.
world of academia, we have to understand these presidents, these university presidents, they do not get promoted to that position because they are risk takers. They are not on vacation going on bungee jumps or parachuting out of planes. I mean, these are pragmatic academic consensus builders who rise in their profession because, they have made bulletproof hires over and over again, and they've made good decisions. And, you don't get promoted in that world by taking risks. And so you have to make these no brainers. And, the Pac-12's offer to those schools was not a no brainer. And then you pointed out they lost the element of surprise. Tim Pernetti, the American commissioner, he was on the ground in Memphis, before any of the offers went out on Monday, and the terms went to the schools Monday morning. And I thought the Pac-12 was smart to give, I think they gave a noon Pacific time deadline to those schools. You saw that go out right around noon, that they made that statement, we're staying in the American. And, but I kind of just wondered, like, just the conspiracy theorist in me was wondering, like, did the Pac-12 make that play because they knew that the American would up the ante? Were they forcing the American, so to speak, to play some cards there and promise those schools more of the revenue so that it would take some other schools off the table? Like, were they worried that UNLV might become a target of the American, and they needed the American to go all in on Memphis and Tulane and South Florida to, maybe take them out of the running? We see that kind of stuff in free agency in the pro sports world.
Yep.
I just kind of wondered what, maybe I'm giving too much credit, but was there a reason why the Pac-12 was okay looking like they asked those schools to the dance and got turned down? Because you don't normally see that in that public.
You don't. That's an interesting thought. Yeah. I also got the sense the last few weeks, and I think you might have actually written the phrase parallel tracks or two tracks, that, they were pursuing American schools, but they also were pursuing a different group of Mountain West schools here. But they lost the narrative there.
Yeah.
Right. If it was, in fact, two tracks, they didn't really get that out. It seemed like publicly it was just one track. And so when they were rebuffed by those three schools, it definitely seemed like a swing and a miss. And as you pointed out, Pernetti on the ground, very sharp guy, very sharp, and saw this coming. I'm sure he saw this coming months ago and was getting everything ready for his conference. And, it's got to be you're Memphis or South Florida, and you're joining a conference that has campuses in Pullman and Corvallis. It has got to be a no-brainer. And UCLA, no-brainer for them. They thought to go in a conference with Rutgers, right? But Tampa to Pullman, that's tough.
Yeah, and I also was told that, the Pac-12 on that parallel path, was looking at UNLV, was looking at Utah State. They bring less media value than maybe Memphis and Tulane because of the viewership in Memphis and Tulane and the way that those markets really have penetration into the TV households. But, the travel expense was on the Pac-12's mind. They were thinking about all that eastward travel and then all the Eastern schools coming west. And so I think ultimately their offer, it was underwhelming in part because I think they held some of those funds back going, look, there's probably a little more media money in it if you get Memphis, but there's way less travel if you pivot to Utah State and UNLV. And on that note, can we talk a little bit about Utah State? They're in as member number 7, football school. They add, obviously, 3 10-win seasons in the last 11 or 12 years. They are the number 5 school in the Mountain West in the last decade as it comes to football viewership. So it makes sense that they would be considered. How do you see the addition of Utah State? Because there were some fans in the Pac-12 who were underwhelmed with that.
I can see why you'd be underwhelmed. I look at it also, let's not forget, pretty good basketball program too.
Yeah.
A lot of wins there over a long time, going back to Stu Morrill and those days. I thought it was important for the Pac-12 to have a presence in Utah. Now, Logan, I've never been to Logan, but it's what, an hour, a little over an
Yeah.
hour from Salt Lake. I don't think it's technically part of the Salt Lake designated market, right, for media purposes. But it is close enough that you have got a presence in Salt Lake if Utah State is in your conference. And I think that that's important because Salt Lake, a lot of players in Salt Lake, a
Yeah.
lot of players. And I think in that regard, it's good. It's also a very good basketball city. Utah's a great basketball state. So I can see why they do it. I mean, if you're just listing the Mountain West schools, um, is Colorado State that much higher on the hierarchy than Utah State? I'm not sure that it is, right? It's part of the Denver market, whereas Logan is
Yeah.
not part of Salt Lake, but those are not dissimilar.
And you're hitting on something there. I mean, they're putting together, obviously they're football centric here with their media rights value, but they're looking off to the side at what kind of basketball conference this conference could be. And we'll get to Gonzaga later, but when you have San Diego State and Colorado State, and you're looking at Boise State in the conference, and now you're potentially talking about Utah State in this conference, those are all recent NCAA tournament participants. That it's fortifying that basketball conference. And if you make the splashier moves down the way and add the schools that a lot of people are speculating and talking about, you've got something from a basketball standpoint to really sell. And and then let's talk geography. I mean, I was looking today at some of the distances from Utah State to Corvallis, Utah State to Boise. Those are really manageable travel
Yep.
places. So I think just when you look at your bottom line, what you add in media value, what it costs to get to your school, what you add in brand, I think Utah State gets in. It also puts the Mountain West Conference in a really precarious position because now you've got 7, they've got 7, and they've got something you want in UNLV. Can we pivot a little bit to what happens to UNLV?
Yeah. What do you think is going to
Yeah.
happen?
Well, I think that I have it like 70-30 that they go to the Pac-12, but I'm being told that UNLV is sitting back right now and doing some of its own evaluation of media rights. It's taken the numbers that the Pac-12 has given it. It's taken numbers that the Mountain West has given it. I am told that, the offer went out at the same time that the offer to Utah State went out. The Pac-12 made both those offers simultaneously. And then Utah State took it and UNLV went, well, hold on. There's a retention bonus potentially there from the Mountain West. I'm being told the Pac-12 is offered to match anything that the Mountain West does. So I think ultimately UNLV gets there. But again, let's go back to the pragmatic consensus building leaders in conferences. I don't think like them. I left the newspaper and went out on my own. Like I'm not like those academics. I would have been gone yesterday and saw the opportunity in it. But I think the Pac-12 ends up with UNLV, but I am being told they're taking their time. They're doing their evaluation. They want to get a third party to look at the numbers to tell them, hey, we feel good about this or not. But very interesting. What about you? What do you think happens?
Well, I think that two things that have happened in the last 24 hours should probably weigh in on their thinking. One, which we'll get to, is the lawsuit or the legal complaint filed by the Pac-12 against the Mountain West. The other is what happened this morning. Their quarterback quit because he claims, Matthew Sluka, he claims that he didn't get paid his NIL money. Now, I don't know what was promised, what wasn't promised, what was signed, not signed, all that stuff. But if you're UNLV and you're thinking, man, we need more money in order to run our football operation, we need more community support and engagement for NIL. And you're thinking, are we going to stay in the depleted Mountain West, or are we going to go to the Pac-12 where Boise and San Diego State are also going, and Fresno? I mean, to me, what happened with this quarterback tells them they need to be on the biggest platform possible to survive in the next era of college football. So I wonder if that's going to have any resonance with their president and their AD and their board of regents as they debate this topic.
Yeah. And I have a source who's telling me that Nevada is bracing itself for separation from UNLV. That Nevada is sitting back, going, okay, because I think they know there's precedent here where UNLV left before, went to the WAC,
Sure.
left them behind in the Big West. I think they sort of see it playing out again.
Yeah.
But I think UNLV probably wants to have clean hands too. And they know that if they leave the Mountain West, it leaves that conference in kind of a precarious position and, in needing to fill a bunch of slots or eventually
Yeah.
dissolving.
It's in a
Before we,
precarious position anyhow. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
even if they stay, we don't know if Air Force is going to stay, right? Because
yeah,
they are, they're below that 8-school threshold where their grant of rights would have been valid. And so I am sure the American has or will talk to Air Force about them at least joining Army and Navy in football, right? I think the Mountain West is in a very, very tenuous spot. I've thought that
yeah.
since September 12th, when the 4 schools left, that hasn't changed. And frankly, I don't know that UNLV's presence is necessarily going to stabilize the whole thing because of what other schools might do.
Let me ask you, we have talked about FBS and FCS schools, and I just think that $5 million that it costs to jump up, maybe North Dakota State has the stomach for it. Maybe they've just tired of winning national championships and they want to take a step up. But that's $5 million plus. If you're moving up from FCS, there's no playoff money for you here for maybe 7 years. So you're going to really need to be subsidized by something or someone, private equity, your own boosters. I think it's a really rare thing to have an FCS school, I think, have the ability to go up, and unless the Mountain West is willing to throw some money at them. But I'm told at this point, the Mountain West is probably going to go shopping for FBS schools. So, maybe there's a UTEP out there or
Yeah, New Mexico State.
New
Yeah, I
Mexico
mean,
State, but
what is that? What is that conference worth, though?
yeah,
Right? I mean,
yeah,
that's the big question, and I don't know that
yeah.
it's worth. It's worth less than the reconstituted Pac-12, and so then you wonder, well, what networks would if you can get the Pac-12, why would you bid on the Mountain West? I think it's a very
But the only way the Mountain West survives is, I think, off the exit fees and the poaching penalties. Because to me, that's their lifeblood, because they don't have a media contract and the ability to negotiate a better deal. They would have to live off that, much in the same way that Oregon State and Washington State are going, look, we got $255 million, but that's not a war chest. They keep telling us, that's not a war chest. They don't want it out there that like they have all this money to spend in realignment, because they have some operating expenses and they don't have a big media deal right now. And they're subsidized by that money that they won. Let's hit on one thing before we get to the lawsuits. Gonzaga to the Pac-12, false report came out, said it was a done deal. Pac-12 and Gonzaga both saying not a done deal, but discussions are ongoing. And a lot of people in Spokane eager for something new. Others saying, wait for the Big 12. How do you see the Gonzaga equation? What's the math here to getting Gonzaga to the Pac-12?
Well, what kind of share are they being offered? That's a big part of it. Are they going to be a full revenue share? Let's just throw out an even number. Let's say it's $10 million per school. Is Gonzaga getting $10 million even though they're not playing football? I think that's going to be a big part of the negotiation. And also the other piece I think about is it's kind of a Brett Yormark playbook move, because Yormark has really emphasized basketball. He thinks that there is a lot of untapped value in college basketball in the new media ecosystem. And he's worked to try to build up the Big 12's basketball brand. He wanted to get UConn. He wanted to get Gonzaga, and his schools weren't ready for it. Pac-12, focusing on basketball, San Diego State, if they get Gonzaga and San Diego State, that's a pretty darn good basketball league. So it's a little bit of a Yormark play.
Yeah. Is it in the conversation to be the best and deepest basketball league in the country? I mean, could you argue that with Boise State and Colorado State and Utah State, San Diego State, Gonzaga, let me just spitball here. What if you brought Grand Canyon with Gonzaga? Do you have now a basketball conference that you could line up, say, hey, top to bottom, we could play any conference in the country? I mean, I think you can make that argument. Like maybe, the Kansas and the Arizona contingent, UCLA and the Big Ten are going to say, hey, we have, and certainly UConn say we have the better team. But let's talk about conference depth in basketball. If there's more money buried in basketball, that's the kind of lineup that could squeeze that money out of TV.
And you mentioned a very intriguing school, Grand Canyon. They got as much money as they need, and they have got an ascendant basketball program. We saw in the NCAA tournament. I think that would be a very smart move for the Pac-12, but only if they can get Gonzaga. If they can't get Gonzaga, then I'm not sure it's worthwhile. It would be a very good basketball league. Would remind me, a little bit of Big East in that it's not loaded with the football blue bloods that have, an endless supply of money. But it would be an awfully good league. It would certainly be better than the former Pac-12 was.
I mean, it's the kind of league where you could go, hey, could they get 4 teams in the Sweet 16? Like it's that kind of league. And look, I'm not going to take credit for the Grand Canyon thing. I'm not just throwing that out there. It came up with a conversation with one of the ADs that I talked about, said, what about a school like Grand Canyon? And I said, they just moved. They just got in the WCC with it. And the response came back, they are not afraid of risk. And so I just kind of wonder, if you get Gonzaga and you layer on Grand Canyon, that's a pretty good basketball conference. And, maybe St. Mary's is out there too. Who knows?
Yeah, and that's one reason people in Memphis were intrigued by joining the Pac-12 is because they saw the basketball side of it.
Yeah. Let's pivot to the lawsuit. I mean, billable hours, undefeated in realignment. You broke the news. You broke the news. Tell us what you know about the lawsuit, the lawyers involved, all of that.
Well, so the Pac-12 has filed a complaint, which is the first step in a lawsuit against the Mountain West over the so-called poaching penalty, which was included in the scheduling agreement between the Pac-12 and the Mountain West for football. They reached that agreement late last year, a 1-year deal for football schedules with an option for a second. We know that they didn't take up the option, right? Included in that contract was a poaching penalty, whereas the Mountain West said, if you take one school, you owe us $10 million. If you take 4 schools, you owe us 45, 50 million. I don't have the numbers in front of me, right? But it was an escalating cost for poaching Mountain West schools. It was a way to try to protect the Mountain West. Well, the Pac-12 yesterday filed a complaint asking Northern California District Court to rule that contract null and void. So that provision in the contract, null and void, so that they don't owe the Mountain West, whatever it is now, $55 million for 5 schools, could be $67 million for 6 schools. So they're trying to get that ruled null and void. We'll see. They've hired the same attorneys that they used when they fought the 10 departing schools. We'll see. Certainly, they're trying to muck it up in court and at least hammer down through negotiations, hammer down that amount.
Yeah, I reached out to a litigator, business law litigator who, I've worked with before. And in fact, I, leaned on him heavily during the Pac-12's last round in Whitman County court, and had him look at the antitrust part of the lawsuit that, not to bore people with the legalese, but, this lawyer read it and came back and I said, what's your takeaway? And he says, the Pac-12 is pissed. It felt like it was pushed in a uncomfortable position, and it's challenging that this is legal under antitrust laws. And I said, what do you think? And he said, well, it's fundamental antitrust that you can't fracture the market. You can't damage the market. You're supposed to compete on an open and equal market. And so his legal opinion was that he thinks the Pac-12 has got some ground to stand on as it, pertains to that. He also sort of pointed out, the Pac-12 did a really good job, and their lawyers did a good job, Wilner, of laying out the $30 million demand from the Mountain West Conference. And he said to me, the lawyer said to me, normally lawyers will not lay it out like that. That would be presented later. But he said they're laying it out like that because they know that media hunks like you and I are going to read it, and we're going to take things out of that lawsuit. He said, and I said, was it Was it well done? Like, do you look at this lawyer to lawyer like a painter looks at another painter's painting, or I read a Jon Wilner column and he says, "Oh, I read it," and he says, "Boy, did they ever make their point." And so he thought that the legal team did a really nice job. I agree with you. I think there'll be a settlement. Mountain West is not going to want to, go to the mattresses on this, but the Mountain West was, that number for 4 schools was 43 million. 5 schools is 55 million. And so it just sort of escalates from there. So it would be sitting at 55 million now with Utah State in, and then more should it be UNLV. But I also noted when the 4 schools left, Wilner, when they left the Mountain West, those 4 original, it was really interesting the semantics that the Pac-12 used in the news release. They said that those schools applied for membership, and then they really were careful about how they positioned that. And at the time I thought, gosh, are they going to try to circumvent the poaching fee? We didn't poach them. They knocked on our door like trick-or-treaters, and so I think all along the Pac-12 had to be thinking we're going to challenge this. I don't think anybody's getting around the exit fees, but I think that
Right.
The Pac-12 is probably going to be victorious in at least negotiating those poaching fees down much lower, or getting rid of them altogether.
Yep, muck it up and see just what tolerance the remaining Mountain West schools have for billable hours. As you noted, that's clearly part of the strategy, at least.
Well,
it never ends.
Never ends.
And everybody acts out of their own self-interest.
Yep. And it's interesting because, I wrote a little bit about this in a column that, you've got Gloria Navarre as the Mountain West commissioner. She's smart. She's good at her job. You've got Teresa Gould, the Pac-12 commissioner. She's smart. She's good at her job. They happen to be friends.
Yeah.
They've worked together. They've had to, they both held jobs as the Pac-12 deputy commissioners. They're just in this system that pits good people against each other. And, I kind of wonder how their friendship will go by the end of this thing. They're both individually saying, we'll be friends. We understand that it's business. But one of them told me just about 2 weeks ago, hey, we've been talking less frequently and less cordially. So I think they'll be strained for a little while as they find themselves pit on the opposite sides of the table for this one.
Yeah, it's just the whole thing is unfortunate. A realignment is unfortunate.
Yeah. I feel bad. And I feel bad. Like, how do you not feel bad for anybody involved in this? Like, I look at San Jose State. I look at, Wyoming. They didn't do anything wrong. They're doing the best they can.
How important this is to Hawaii. God.
Yeah.
No, I'm with you. It is. You feel bad. You felt bad for Washington State and Oregon State, and now you feel bad for the Mountain West schools.
Yeah.
And you just want to shake everybody and say, acting out of self-interest is the wrong way to go. And yet they all do it at every level.
And then once it's done around you, the Pac-12 has to rebuild. It has to add schools. And so it's in a position where it's got to turn and go, okay, what are the best available schools? We have a better brand. We have a better brand than the Mountain West. We have the ability to put together the top schools that are available. Let's go get it. Pivoting to the weekend in the football, the actual football.
Oh my!
What do you see as the best college football of the weekend?
Well, sticking with our Pac-12, there's a couple of really huge games nationally, which I think you may touch on, but regionally, I am very interested in the Washington State-Boise State game. That's important on both sides of the playoff. It's important on the automatic qualifier spot because the group of 5 has one spot. The highest ranked team from the group of 5 is getting in. Boise State is a contender for that. So is UNLV, Memphis, Toledo. There's a whole bunch of schools that are trying to get that seat at the table that is guaranteed for them. Boise needs to win in order to get that spot. But Washington State, if they win this game, they're going to be favored in the last 7 games of their season. And if somehow they can go 12-0, they're going to get an at-large bid, and they're going to take an at-large bid away from the SEC and Big Ten, and that would be an enormous story. Now, 7 games is a ton, but if they get over this Boise hump, you have to start thinking about that it could be a real possibility. So for Washington State, it's a critical game as well.
And I think it means more for Washington State, and because there is a scenario where Boise State could still be the highest ranked conference champion, from the G5 and get an automatic bid as the 5th school. And
Yep.
and there's a scenario here where both of these teams can get into the playoff, with Boise State, having a close loss to Oregon. Let's say it's a close loss to Washington State. Washington State runs the table. I mean, there's a way that both of these schools get in the playoff. It's a narrow path, but it's a path. Yep. But, I talked to Bruce Barnum, the Portland State coach, played both of these schools, talked to him yesterday. Yes. He lost 70-30 against Washington State. He lost 56-14 at Boise. I asked him kind of what was the difference. He said Boise sat a lot of guys late in that game. Ashton Jeanty only had 11 carries for about 156 in the game.
Yeah.
But Barnum told me he thought that Boise State was more physical. They were more physical on the D line, more physical on the O line. So he thinks Washington State's got to do something to try to disrupt Boise State. He also looks at the running back and he says, hey, that number 2, he says he doesn't need a hole. He just needs a little glimmer and he can shoot through there. He's that good. And he says sometimes you play the play right and he just makes your guy miss or bounces off him.
Yeah.
So I got the impression, he said very close game, but I got the impression he liked Boise a little bit more just because of the physicality and the offensive and defensive line. But we shall see how that one plays out. Big one for me. Look, I'm going to go to the Oregon UCLA game. I don't know if I'll be able to stay awake. It starts at 8 p.m. It's a Fox 8 o'clock kickoff on the West Coast. But it's Oregon. It's their first Big Ten conference game. And it comes against their old Big Ten conference foe, UCLA. I'm interested to see Oregon play a Big Ten game. My eyes are on that one a little bit. How about you? What else you got?
Well, that one's I would be surprised if that's even close, right? The Ducks have had two weeks to prepare. UCLA was just at LSU. I mean, that has 48-14 written all over it, I think.
It should be that way, but we'll see.
I'm curious about a Friday game, Washington at Rutgers.
Ooh.
Not that either of those schools is, going to challenge for a playoff berth, but just the logistics. I was trying to think of the last time you had a West Coast school playing on the East Coast on a Friday. Now, Stanford did it last week. They opened the ACC at Syracuse, but Stanford had a week off. They did not play on the weekend of September 14th. The Huskies played Northwestern, and now they got a short week of preparation, and they're playing on the East Coast. To me, that is a competitive disadvantage, and I'm very curious to see how they hold up. And this is part of the Big Ten's new world, right? Just like, we could get to the Oregon UCLA kickoff time, but Fox is making a big push on Friday nights, Big Ten games, and Washington drew a short straw in this case, having to play on the East Coast. I mean, they couldn't even go to Lincoln, right? Or Minneapolis. They had to go all the way to Rutgers for a game. That's tough.
Well, Oregon and Washington and UCLA will all play 2 Friday night games on Fox. USC gets 1. How about Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State saying no to Friday nights? No. And in Michigan, by the way, the athletic director at Michigan, pretty outspoken, saying we will not ever consider that. And by the way, we only want to play 2 Saturday night games that are home games. And so Michigan raising some eyebrows within the conference, basically saying, hey, we're not playing by the rules that everyone else is playing. What do you make of that? Like the West Coast schools getting kind of slotted into those Friday evening spots.
That's what they signed up for, first of all. And second of all, that is how conferences fracture. When you don't treat Michigan and Ohio State differently, when you don't treat USC differently, or Texas differently, then you end up with those schools leaving. And there's an old story about how Jim Delaney, legendary former Big Ten commissioner, right? Whenever there was a big conference issue, he'd pick up the phone. He'd call the 8 schools. What do you think we should do? Okay, yep, that makes sense. That makes sense. And then he'd call Michigan, Ohio State, and say, all right, what do you want to do? And whatever Michigan, Ohio State would tell him, that's what he did. You got to keep your big boys happy. And I can see why people would be upset that Manuel was talking publicly about it. But behind the scenes, if you're the Big Ten, you better be keeping Michigan and Ohio State happy. And one reason the Pac-12 does not exist in its previous form is because it didn't do a great job keeping USC happy.
One more point on your Washington and Rutgers game. How about Washington fans finally getting to see their team play?
Yeah,
They've
that's
been
true.
blacked out on the Big Ten Network, on Peacock. Washington fans are probably just happy to see Friday night. I'm in because they haven't seen their team play really, and they finally get a chance to see them. What else you got?
Well,
I want to look at.
Let me just interject with that point about the fact it's been hard for Washington fans to see Washington, and everybody thought that going to the Big Ten was going to solve all the distribution problems, all the visibility problems. And right, what's the first thing that happens? Big Ten Network blacked out on Comcast. Washington, then the Apple Cup is on Peacock, and now Oregon and UCLA is on at 8:00 at night Pacific, right? And I know you touched on that in your column today, right? It didn't solve all the problems going to the Big Ten.
Yeah, I got a reader who's 76 years old who's said he's in training for the Saturday night game. So his bedtime's 9 p.m. He wakes up at dark 30. So he's going to bed at 9:15 on Tuesday, 9:30 on Wednesday, 9:45 on Thursday. He's just trying to condition himself like he's a Olympic athlete training for Saturday night so he can stay up, won't fall asleep in the second quarter. So I think that's kind of funny. All right, game I have my eyes on. I mean, come on, we got to talk about Alabama, Georgia. Kalen DeBoer's first taste of that one. I was talking to Chip Towers of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. He's a beat reporter for Georgia. He's had that job where they've just won and won and won and won. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of curiosity from the Georgia side to see, what is Alabama going to be like with Kalen DeBoer? And it's, DeBoer has been very good in big games. He was good in big games at Fresno State, great in big games at Washington. This is a big one at Alabama.
Huge. And one of the rare times that these teams have played during the regular season on a campus. I think it's the third time in the last 15 years. They played in Athens like 2015, in Tuscaloosa a few years ago, maybe the COVID season. But most of their meetings have been either in the SEC championship or in the playoff. So that's an interesting piece. And also, we should mention Georgia's got to play Alabama on the road, Texas on the road, and I believe Ole Miss on the road, and they play Tennessee at home. That's what? 4 of the top 6 teams in the country Georgia's playing, which makes you think, what happens if Georgia loses 3 games?
Yeah.
Is it possible that 9-3 Georgia with all 3 losses or the top 10 teams doesn't make the playoff? Right? It's part of the bigger picture of what's that number? How do you get in the playoff? Is it got to be 2 losses? Could you get in with 3? To me, that's part of the backdrop of this whole season. Is what is the bar for getting in the playoff as an at-large team, and how will that impact future scheduling? Right, we've talked about that. Yeah. If ads and coaches see that Georgia's not getting in at 9-3, they're going to be scared to schedule the big non-conference games.
And I think you're seeing some of the lobbying starting already from some of the conferences, the coaches, the commissioners, who are going to ramp this up as we get into head towards November 5th, that Tuesday, election night, when the first playoff rankings come out. There's going to be a lot of pandering. There's going to be a lot of lobbying. People are going to say, we're the deepest conference. We play each other. This is why we belong. And I think there will be some conferences that look over at Washington State if they do get out of this weekend undefeated and start to worry a little bit that there's going to be one less at-large berth available. And so, it's a lot of money and it's a lot of exposure that's at stake with those playoff spots.
It'd be a fascinating story if Washington State is unbeaten, even if they're unbeaten on November 1st. Think about what that would do to the whole narrative.
Yeah, I went back and looked, people are asking, could they get in with 1 loss? I don't think so. I think you leave yourself really vulnerable and on the bubble with 1 loss if you're Washington State, because I think the committee's probably going to view Washington State as a group of 5 school just because of the schedule. And so, I looked at one loss Tulane. They were 8-1 when the rankings came out in 2022. They were at 16 at 8-1. So it's not inconceivable that you could creep up and get into the top 12, but I think you'd be sitting right around 12, 13, 14. And you don't want to leave yourself in that position and leave the decision in the hands of, a college football world that basically told you don't belong, a year ago or 2 years ago. And so, Washington State, they've got their destiny in their hands right now, and they've got John Mateer at quarterback. And so let's see what they do as they go to Boise. It's a big opportunity.
And if they win at Boise and they're actually in this playoff discussion, they're going to need Washington to win in the Big Ten, because the better Washington is, the better Washington State's resume. So Cougar fans are going to have to root for the Huskies.
And Texas Tech. And that's why Texas Tech's win over Arizona State, I thought, was good for Washington State. So we shall see. We'll be back with a brand new episode next week. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you subscribe, and so you don't miss a thing. And if you're listening to the podcast, do the same. Share it with friends and family. Read me at johncanzano.com. Read him at wilnerhotline.com. We'll be back next week.
Thanks, everybody.